Today we are talking about penetration testing. It brings me great pleasure to be joined by Oliver Pinson-Roxburgh, the Chief Executive Officer at Bulletproof.
Bulletproof is a trusted provider of innovative cybersecurity products and people-centric services. It works with businesses of all sizes to protect their brand, value, and assets against today's threat landscape.
Oliver, thank you for joining me today.
No problem at all.
So to get started, what is penetration testing?
Yes, it's a pretty common question we get from customers, and really, it's if you've ever thought, I wonder what somebody could do with my systems that are exposed to the internet, and could they be exploited? That's really the job of a penetration tester. So a lot of people use the term ethical hacker, and the concept is that you're kind of looking at it from the perspective of a malicious actor, and it's about trying to see if you can identify vulnerabilities in the systems that are exposed in order to provide organizations with a clear understanding of how they could remediate any of those vulnerabilities. So it's essentially just acting like a bad actor on the internet, and we are trying to find as many vulnerabilities as possible. That's a clear definition, really, it needs to be a clear definition, really, is that a penetration test is more about finding all of the vulnerabilities within a system rather than just trying to hack a site, which an attacker would normally do.
Fantastic. And what are the different types of penetration testing?
Oh, there's so many different types of testing. I probably could spend hours just talking about that alone, but I'll give you a few examples. So one of the ones that a lot of people are looking at these days is something called red team testing. And the concept of a red team test is that you set an objective, and the idea of that objective is really set by the business. So, for example, if you had a business that was particularly concerned about their physical security, the way you could approach it is that you would say, I'd like you to try and gain access to my building. Once you're in my building, steal a laptop, and then see if you could take that laptop away and log into my external assets. For example, and expose as much data as possible. You could use red team testing to set up an objective to say, well, I'd like you to get access to my CEO's office and to gain access to some secret files, or you could use red team testing as a way to define more of a clearer set of goals to say, can you socially engineer somebody and then gain access to a building? And from gaining access to a building, could you steal sensitive data or do something similar to that? So with red team testing, it's very much more a case of your objective really is what defines the test. You can do whatever you want. So from a pen tester's point of view, they could try breaking in, they can use phishing, they can do all sorts of different things. Then you've got external testing, or more commonly known as infrastructure testing. You would do this both externally and internally. That's more looking at an infrastructure vulnerability. So that's, are your systems patched? Are they up to date, externally facing and also internally? So that's more putting yourself on an internal network or an external network and trying to see if there's any vulnerabilities there. And then there's application testing. App testing is more about testing your web applications to see if they've been coded correctly and there's no vulnerabilities introduced by bad coding practices. And then there's a couple of others out there like IoT testing and mobile testing, and they're more about testing the mobile applications and the internet connected devices you might be using for your system. So there's a broad range of different tests, and also things like social engineering as well. But there's lots of different testing. Anything that really relates to a physical asset or an individual that could be hacked is you can define a test for, basically.
Fantastic. And how often would you recommend, from Bulletproof, how often would you recommend carrying out penetration testing?
Well, as a pen testing organization and a security professional of over 15 years, I would say do it as often as you can, or as often as your budget would allow. And that's not because, I'm a co-founder of a security company. It's more a case of, from a business point of view, it just makes sense to test as regularly as you can. I understand that most budgets don't stretch to that. So be sensible about your testing program, really, and be pragmatic. So for example, most organizations would do at least an annual penetration test, which is sufficient, but you've got to remember that a penetration test is only as good as the time in which it was done. The day after the test has been completed, somebody could go in, make changes to your application, make changes to your infrastructure, and completely expose yourself, and you wouldn't know about it until your next pen test a year later. So best practice is trying to increase the frequency now. So it's suggesting, in general best practices and compliance standards that you should be trying to do as frequent as you can, maybe biannually. our suggestions for most customers is you could do a larger test annually to make sure that you get a full coverage of your assessment, and then do small mini tests throughout the year, either periodically or during major changes. So if you make a significant change to your infrastructure or your applications, you should then go out and do another assessment. Now, you could do that as a time-limited assessment, which means that a penetration testing organization would spend as much time as you have budget for in order just to do a bit of a temperature check and validate it. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you have the budget, I would do it as frequently as you can, and definitely after any significant or major change.
Sure, makes perfect sense to me. I guess it's about being proactive and preparing yourself for the ever-changing threat landscape, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the other thing to consider is if there is any significant threats out there that may affect you, is to look at having somebody test it, an organization test for your potential, to see if you're potentially vulnerable to that particular threat. So looking at threat intelligence is a good indicator. If you can make it relevant to your business and you can see that there's actual genuine threats out there that could affect you, then a pen test is a good way to see. Again, if you set a specific task to see if that's something you might be vulnerable to, again, a good opportunity to have somebody manually check it rather than just having automated tools to try to figure it out for you, because often they can generate a lot of false positives.
Thank you for watching today's video. Be sure to keep following us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube for the daily video updates.